My name is Carolyn Wells. My call sign is N0CJ, and currently I am the co-chair of the Hospitals Committee for the Kansas City region, as well as the Trauma and Emergency Preparedness Manager at Liberty Hospital. I am here today with my colleague, Matt May, who is from Wyandotte County Emergency Management. His call sign is KC4WCG, and we're going to be talking about an operational overview of the Kansas City Hospital Emergency Amateur Radio teams. These teams were put together by the Mid-America Regional Council back in 2007. Is that when we started this project?
Yeah, it would be about right. Yep,
Okay.
2007.
And the reason we started it was because of a little hurricane.
Little tiny old Katrina. No one's ever heard of Katrina. Katrina had an interesting impact. It had many impacts, but the one that was most interesting is a lot of the area that was inundated with floodwater included a lot of major hospital facilities. There were several, and you can read about them. There are lots of stories about them, Mercy and so forth. But the other one that was really impacted was Tulane University Hospital, and the outcome of that was that it was a facility managed by Hospital Corporations of America (HCA), and they requested support from their regional headquarters, which happened to be in Tallahassee, Florida. Interesting side note is that I got my start in amateur radio in Tallahassee, Florida, and somebody that I knew personally got requested to provide support. He's a communications person for the state of Florida. And so he rounded up some of the local hams, and off they flew them back over to Tulane, was able to deploy them there, and that became their one and only communications source. And I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, it was about 48 hours into the event, at least by this point, right?
Up on the roof.
About 400 and some people still stranded in the building. The bottom two floors of the facility flooded out. All their generators were at the ground level or below, so they had no power. This included not only patients but staff, all
Correct.
sorts of folks who got stuck there, including, I think, the story about the one young lady who swam to the facility
Right.
in the midst of going into labor. So they had some
Right.
interesting times, and amateur radio showed its value when the chips are really down. They were able to get communications out, make a request for the evacuation facilities like helicopters and so forth,
Right.
and including bringing in soldiers to protect the facility because they had concerns about looting and so forth, which I believe never really
Correct.
happened, but they wanted some support. So there was a lot of interesting logistics communications that were provided by the amateur radio operators involved in that response.
Right. There's a book, I believe, Leave No One Behind, that details a lot of this information. It's a very interesting book, easy read.
It really
But
is.
if you're interested in it, I think that that'd be good for people to go to and just kind of see a little more of the amateur radio operators and the whole facility and how they did.
Correct.
So this project, we put it together and we came to you. You were at that time working for the Mid-America Regional Council
That's correct.
as their technology support. And so we came to you and said, Matt, we have some money and we'd like to put radios in hospitals.
And we always like it when you show up and say we have money, because nothing works without it. But it was a great project for me because I already had a long tenure with amateur radio. I had seen it work very well in other events, and most notably for me personally was Hurricane Andrew
Right.
in South Florida in '92. So I knew the value it could bring for emergency communications, and we started to engineer a project that was going to initially impact the 33 hospitals that were in the metro area, both on the Kansas side and on the Missouri side, which meant divvying up funding between the two because that state line separated the funding sources.
Right.
But we were able to start to form that project up. So we enlisted the help of Brian Short, KC0BS, as a technical expert. Between us, we sat down with you and other hospital folks,
Right.
tried to decide what it is you really needed to accomplish and what kind of communications you expected to have. And what we learned out of that was there's a lot more dependence on data and sending of files, sending of forms. I learned personally I had much awareness of the hospital variant of incident command.
Correct.
We learned that there's a different set of forms there that we needed to try and deal with, and we started to develop systems that would help with that.
So when we put the project team together, we said, okay, we want to talk both locally as well as long distance, because there are some corporate entities in the Kansas City area who have corporate headquarters in other states. And so we wanted them to be able to talk back. We wanted to be able to talk to both Missouri and Kansas state operations centers. And so those were kind of the basic needs that we came with.
Right.
We didn't have enough funding to put a long distance or an HF radio in every hospital.
Right.
So what we came up with was the hub and spoke.
Absolutely. The idea was that, and for the amateurs who might be viewing this, they'll understand that that's a much more expensive installation, requires a much more extensive antenna system. All of those
HF
were
does.
the HF does, right? And so what we decided was that within each county there would be one HF station. And then if there were more than one facility in a county, that those other facilities would get VHF and UHF and data capabilities so that they could share data inward or information inward into that HF facility. And then if it needed to go long distance, if it
Right.
needed to go elsewhere, whether it's to the State Emergency Operations Center or even just from one side of the state to the other, we would have the capabilities to do that. Or as you said, even some of these corporations who have headquarters who are responsible for getting resources back to these facilities when they're in trouble, getting them a direct path of information so that literally you could put the CEOs in the building and the headquarters guys are in the building. They can talk to each other because we would simply hand them the mics and say, here, have a chat.
Right.
And then they could discuss what it is their next steps would be. And that was really our vision.
Right. So we started out on this project. We had some unique challenges when we were installing these radios.
Absolutely.
We have a lot of different kinds of facilities. We have old facilities and we have new facilities. Some of them were a big challenge. Some of them we had to install up in the penthouse.
Absolutely.
Some of them we were installing in security offices. Some were in boardrooms. So it really depended. Each facility was very unique.
Absolutely. And what we learned about how hospitals do business, like where they would set up their incident command centers, how they would operate, influenced where we were trying to put the radios. We want them to be close, but not in the middle of that mess,
Right.
because as we know, the radios can get noisy. On the other hand, we don't want to be so far away that we're separated from what's going on, and
Right.
people tend to forget the resources there in the heat of battle. So there was a lot of discussion about that. Just the physical installation. Some of these facilities, as you said, are fairly old. Some are brand new. Neither one of them really liked poking holes in the walls and the ceilings, so we had to be cognizant of that. Some were 11 stories tall. Some
Right.
were only 1 story tall and in a deep valley, which was challenging for the line of sight communications, and may or may not have even had any kind of a tower structure. So we had to work with all those limitations and try and, again, keep consistent, though, with the equipment that we put in so that everybody was working with the same equipment, would all be programmed the same, it would all function the same so that there was interoperability between the operators.
Right. So you want to talk a little bit about the equipment that we have?
Sure.
I'm sure that the amateur radios listening to this would be very interested in the types of radios that we have.
Sure.
And what we have in the installations as part of the setup.
Okay, let's start with the line of sight communications first, so the local communications. Traditionally for us, that's primarily on 2 meters and the 70 centimeter bands, and so we looked for pieces of equipment that would support that. We also wanted to have another channel or back channel, if you will, of 6 meter capability. Gives us a little bit longer distance,
Right.
not quite as much infrastructure there, but if we were down to talking direct, that was going to be our best hope. So in looking at all the equipment that was out there and looking at the capabilities, we settled on the Yaesu 88 and 8900 radios for a couple of reasons. One is the 8900 model had a 4-band capability.
Right.
And even though at the end of the day, we decided not to implement the 10-meter portion of it, there's no antenna for it, the radio is capable of it. The second part of that was they operate almost identically. And as we follow the training series that you'll see in other clips, you'll see that we talk primarily about the 8900 and then we talk to the differences with the 8800. The implementation was the 8900 would be primarily a voice radio, so that's where you're going to be passing traffic by voice, and then the 8800 would be primarily a data radio. But because of their capabilities, they were fully interchangeable with each other, again looking primarily at the 2 meter and 70 centimeter bands. Each one had 2 full radios built into each one, and then they were also fully capable of both bands
Right.
simultaneously, including certain features that we thought were important. like crossband repeat capabilities, so that you could take a handheld, wander out through the facility, still using the capabilities of the full power radio that might be in a radio room in a different location.
Right.
So all those became considerations in looking at the design.
I know one of the other considerations that we had for using the Yaesu radios is the heads were detachable, so that we
Absolutely.
could put the radio up in a penthouse, but still have the radio head down in an office or a boardroom or wherever.